Hello, welcome back to my Terraforming Mars strategy guide. Today is episode 3 and we're gonna talk about strategy. So these are some of the strongest strategies, at least in my opinion. So here are the stuff we're gonna look at today. So we got the major strategy, the overall game plan, I'll talk about that in a second. And then we got all of these minor strategies. And to be honest, the only reason I call these minor strategies is just to imply that you can have more of these at once. So when I say the overall game plan or the major strategy, what I mean is this aspect we talked about in episode 1. Do I want to aim for a long game or do I want to aim for a short TR heavy game? Basically, we have these 4 scenarios. Every single game of Terraforming Mars is going to shape out to one of these scenarios. Number 1, you got the greedy engine, so you want the game to drag out. Number 2, your opponent got the greedy engine, so you want to close the game to actually punish the greedy players. Number 3, you try to outgreed your greedy opponent. Also entirely reasonable, sometimes this will work out fine. And number 4, all players are trying to end the game as soon as possible, and this almost never happens. It's so boring, man. So in every single game you have to try to figure out, is it in your best interest to let the game drag out, or do you have a better chance of winning by being this filthy, dirty terraformer? We're gonna get back to that. But then we should look at some of the minor strategies as well. And like I said, in lack of better words, I'll just call these minor strategies, implying that you can use more of these at once in a given game. You can mix and match these strategies however you want to. The only strategy that doesn't really mix that well with the others are the terraforming strategy, and that makes sense, right? Because the terraforming strategy really wants to close the game as soon as possible. And most of the other strategies we're going to talk about today are going to be aimed at long games. I've actually attempted to make this aspect a little bit clearer by labeling the minor strategies into short game or long game in terms of generation, as I feel in most games, not always, but in most games, some strategies are more suited for shorter games, whereas other strategies are more suited for longer games. So hopefully this way it's like intuitive which strategy goes well together and which strategy does not go well together. So minor strategy number 1, refuse to terraform. Perhaps even to the point where you hold on to your heat and your plants. So this is aiming for the long game. So especially in 2 or 3 player games, there is this annoying strategy where a player just never plays terraforming cards, or he is even holding on to plants and heat just because that player has the biggest engine and he wants the game to drag out. It's really annoying. And then when he feels certain that this is indeed the last generation, no matter what he does, then he just spends all of his stuff, all of his plans, all of his heat he's been holding on to. The thing is, all of the greedy strategies actually want the game to go for as long as possible because they make the most VP in the last generation, and then if you let it go one more generation, they're gonna make even more VP than you in the last generation. So this is why it could be useful sometimes to hold on to either your plants or your heat. What I mean is, getting +1 generation can make a huge difference if, for example, you are the one going God mode. It can really make a difference, because the guy who's going God mode, he's gonna make so many VP in the last generation. It's insane. As a side note, you can also stack up your heat to claim the water bonus on the oxygen scale. It's actually pretty common that people do this. This bonus is really important, so this is a way of fighting for that bonus. However, holding on to plants and heat could also mean that you in the end miss out on some TR, which can also be a big deal, so you have to weigh the pros and cons here. What I mean is, if you're holding on to a lot of plants or heat and then the parameter is gonna close and you just didn't even notice or something, and then you just sit with 1,000 heat and you can't use it for anything, it's not good. What you really should do is you should identify the last parameter to close, and then you're gonna not terraform that too much, if that makes sense. So if you recognize that the heat is the last one to close, then you can hold on to your heat resources. And worth noting here, if you intend to hold back plants, you probably should have protected habitat. And I'm gonna show you a clip of Boneless telling you how many plants he has. I mean, look at this, I have 60 plants. 20 plant production and 60 plants, and I haven't even played insects yet. I know that I wanted to close it at 14, so when he passes I'm gonna terraform until there's 1 spot left or something, if that makes sense. So it just barely goes to 14 generations, because then I have getting the maximum out of the terraform rating as well. 32 plant production, let's go. That's a lot of plants. In this game I went for an Omega greedy card strategy, so in this case it makes a lot of sense to let the game drag out. If you want to watch the whole game, you can check out episode 16 part 2. We are going to talk more about the greedy card strategy later in this video, minor strategy number 3, but before we do that, let's talk about the polar opposite strategy, which is the filthy, dirty terraformer. So this is obviously best for short games. So this is where you just terraform like an absolute madman and try to end the game as soon as possible. And funny enough, even though this strategy is the exact opposite of the first one, it's equally as annoying. If you're having a good game, a greedy game, and then this guy is just terraforming, it's so annoying. You want a long game, you want to have fun, right? So why So the idea here is you try to close the game as soon as possible, because then the guy with the really greedy big engine, he doesn't have time enough to actually make the transition from engine building to VP grabbing. So the way it's gonna shape out is you're gonna be ahead in the first half of the game, hopefully the entire game, because you just keep making TR and keep trying to close the game. So you can see it like this, that if you're the terraforming guy, your VP is gonna be like in a straight line, because you're just starting the game, trying to get VP, and by the end you still want to get VP, so that's a straight line. Whereas the greedy guy, he's gonna have no VP to begin with because he's making engine, and then in the last few generation he's gonna crush you if you let the game drag on too long. But the point is you want to end the game like here, before the greedy guy like overtakes you in the end. I hope this is not mirrored, I'm not sure. Now it's important to understand that you still need a little bit of money income yourself. You still play the mega credit cards you get in the early game, you still have to climb out of the hole like we talked about. But in addition to money income in the early game, you also value TRR, plant production, heat production. And then you can like make a transition from engine building to TRR pretty early on. And while this strategy is pretty boring, not gonna lie, it can be quite powerful. It's a good way to punish the greedy guy who invested so much into a ton of mega credit production and card draw. So if you see your opponent getting like 40 mega credit production more than you, then this is definitely a strategy you just have to consider. I think only a few times I actually started the game immediately thinking, okay, I'm gonna go all in for the terraforming strategy. I did it on the Mars app just so I could show you guys a game where I went for the strategy. So here is the starting hand I had in that game. If you want to see the whole game, it's in episode 17. Not gonna lie, this hand is pretty terrible, but I really didn't get much engine building cards in my hand, so I think I did the correct thing and just went for the terraforming strategy. It is a little bit questionable to keep insulation in my opening hand, but this was a 3-player game, so I just wanted the option available to me that I could turn all the heat into mega credit production and go for the greedy long game. So this is also something I considered. But I think in the name of science, I still just went for the terraforming strategy here. I want to point out that winning a game with this trash society support is actually an achievement in and of itself. I really want to make myself clear here. I deeply hate this prelude society support. Here's some other examples of corporations and cards you might want to pick up when you're going for the strategy. These are just examples, but you can imagine heat production, plant production, naturally stuff like this is what you're looking for. And the funny thing is that even if you are running this terraforming strategy, even though you're all in on just trying to end the game, even in this case, I still feel like regolith eaters and GHG production bacteria are still sort of bad cards. I'm really not a fan of these cards. However, if you do happen to get Extreme Cold Fungus combined with one of these cards, then it's great, of course. One free TR every generation is actually worth something. It's like worth 8 mega credit production if you want to look at it that way, at least until the parameter closes. And then it's once again pretty useless. Also, heat production is of course pretty nice when you're going for this combo, so especially keep your eye out for some of these heat combos like we talked about in the first video. So you could decide to play the terraforming strategy based on your starting hand like I did here. I mean, sometimes you have a starting hand, it's like, it's the only thing you have, right? And you have to play the cards you're getting. But to be honest, mostly what I do is I look to get the greedy engine up and running, and if I have just no luck building an engine as strong as my opponent, then I will consider to transition into the strategy instead. Also, what I sometimes do is I try to compete with the greedy guy. I try to be greedy myself, and if I feel like I'm Omega losing this war and I'm back to 2 cards and he has like 20 cards, then I can look to transition into the terraforming strategy and try to close the game as soon as possible. So this is also an idea. I think you should always have this strategy in the back of your head. And finally, you should also keep in mind that the terraforming strategy is simply better in 4 or 5 player games. In 2-player games, the card strategy is simply superior. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say you should never play the terraforming strategy in a 2-player game. 3-player game is even questionable. In 2-player games, the best strategy is by far the greedy card strategy. So let's talk about it. I love this one. Full greed, aim to go god mode, and this is of course better for long games. The card strategy is the best strategy for long greedy games, and it is the best strategy for 2-player games. For the same reason, 2-player games are also usually longer and greedier. Like we mentioned in tip 8.5, if there are only 2 or 3 players, you should really aim to play the greedy card strategy every single game, and then if you have no luck, you can make a new plan. But you should really start the game out trying to do this. The greedy card strategy can also work in 4 to 5 player games, but then it comes with a lot more risk because 4 to 5 player games tends to be shorter in terms of generations. In other words, the other strategies have a high chance of beating you if we're talking about the 4 to 5 player games. So what defines the ultra greedy card strategy? You might be thinking, Boneless, excuse me, I actually do this every time. I always go for engine and cards, of course. So why is this like a strategy? Isn't it just what you always do? And Not exactly. It is true that what I mostly do is I try to go for money income and card draw, but to go all in on this particular strategy is a little bit different. Here's what I mean. Number one, you keep all of the card draw cards. Even some of the bad ones you also probably keep. The only way you don't keep card draw cards with this strategy is if you just have too many cards and too little engine, then maybe you just don't keep all of them. So all of the card draw cards are good when you play the strategy. However, I would like to briefly mention some of the absolute MVPs. I'm talking about the cards where you draw a card when X happens. The thing is, when you play the strategy, you want to be playing like a million cards. And if you're playing a million cards, naturally you're gonna see more science tag, you're gonna see more cards that cost 20 plus, which means that these cards, for example, are especially juicy. I'm talking Mars University, Olympus Conference, Spin-off Department. I don't think I've ever had a bad game where I had Mars University and Olympus Conference. And Spin-off Department is just straight up one of the best cards in the game. It's literally broken, especially if you get it early on. I mean, this card is literally good. You know what? They all good. These cards are just amazing, especially for the card strategy, but even if you're not playing the card strategy, these cards are still very good. AI Central is of course also one of the good ones, especially if the game goes long and especially if you can get it down pretty early on. The thing about AI Central, like I mentioned in the first video, is it can be a little bit risky if the game only goes to like 7th generation and then you spend the entire game playing AI Central, then you could be in trouble. But for this particular strategy, AI Central is of course very nice. So what else defines the card strategy? 2. You want to keep more cards and have a bigger hand size than normally. It does happen sometimes actually that I have 20 cards or maybe sometimes even 30 cards in my hand. Usually only in 2 or 3 player games though, but if I do have all of these cards in my hand, it means that I am all in on the greedy card strategy. Worth noting, you shouldn't just keep any card you see. It's not like this. The cards you keep still have to be good, and preferably you'll get a lot of them for free with card draw and stuff like this. Number 3, you create a huge engine of money income. All of the cards you're getting are only useful to you if you have a lot of mega credit, steel and titanium production, so you can actually buy all the stuff. And as you probably know by now, when I say money income, this is the stuff I mean. All of this stuff is good. Number 4, do not terraform too much as you want the game to drag out. So we're back to this we talked about in the beginning, the overall game plan. For this strategy, you especially want the game to drag on for as long as possible. So you want to identify which of the 3 parameters is the last one to close and avoid terraforming that for the most part. Or if it is the second last generation and everyone else has passed, then what you do is you terraform everything except one step. Number 5, get discount cards. Considering that you aim to play more cards than normally, the secret juice to the card strategy is discount. All of these cards here are just great if you're going for God mode. What I mean is these types of cards is how you just keep playing cards and keep playing cards when you go God mode. All of a sudden you have so much synergy that you literally like receive mega credits when you play a cheap space event because you have so much discount, like media group and advanced error breaking something. If you get to this point, you are literally unstoppable. This is where the card strategy just rough. Also, Meat Industries is really good. Same idea, you just get stuff. And worth noting, Meat Industries is closely tied to the green tech strategy, and the green tech strategy is very closely related to this strategy, I think. So this it just works well together. Number 6, look for resource amplifiers. We talked about this in chapter 2, tip number 17, but all of these resource amplifiers, they're like perfect, especially when you go for this strategy because you just want the biggest engine the world has ever seen, and these are the cards to get it with. Also, you should look for these cards that gets better the longer the game drags on. Once again, we talked about this in the previous video. Number 7, look for VP amplifiers. So, of course, we got the Jovian amplifiers. The Jovian strategy is also something you want to look at when you're going for this greedy card strategy, naturally. And we will talk more about the Jovian strat later. It could also be like the green tech amplifiers. Some of these cards here, just some of them, but the green tech synergies in general can actually give you even more point than Jovian cards, especially when you're going God mode and you just play so many cards. We will also talk about this later in this video in minor strategy number 6. Basically, these 7 points here, this is what for me truly defines the greedy card strategy. And the theme here, of course, is you want to play as many cards as possible, and to play so many cards, naturally you want a strong card draw, you want card discount, you want a big engine, you want amplifiers, you want everything. So with this strategy specifically, your late game VP mainly comes from all the cards you've played, all the green tech synergies, all the numbers on the cards, stuff like this. Jovian amplifiers, microbes, animals, all of this, really good. So like we also talked about in the first video, the formula is money income multiplied with card draw. If these two things multiplied with each other exceeds 1,000, then you have truly achieved God mode. and you will win. I actually prepared a clip that reflects exactly how I'm feeling when I like 1 out of 100 games manage to go full god mode. I'm just gonna run the clip actually. Going full god mode is a state of mind that encapsulates the peace and tranquility and happiness and fulfillment you find yourself in when you have a ton of money and you can play a ton of cards every single generation. To get the best effect of going full god mode, you need to have a good engine, you need to have a lot of card draw, and preferably you also need to have some good discount cards. But when you're going full god mode, you will know about it because it feels exactly like this video here. This is god mode. So let's break down this starting hand because I feel like this starting hand just screams god mode. Why does it scream god mode? Because I have both a ton of card draw and a ton of mega credit production amplifiers, and like I said, you need both. So we got Terraformer and Credit Core, pretty similar corporations. In this case, of course, I went for Terraformer as I already have 2 Earth amplifiers in my hand, so the Earth tag is worth a lot more than the no tag and Credit Core. And also, I already have a couple of Earth tags, whereas I only have 1 card that costs 20 plus, so of course I'm gonna go for Terraformer here. I would have liked to have Point Luna instead. It would have been better, but you know, you can't get everything. The preludes here are not the best, to be honest. They are pretty average, nothing exciting. However, 2 of them does come with a science tag, so I chose those 2. Why the science tag? Well, because I want to play AI Central in the first generation. It's very good. And I actually can play AI Central in the first generation, which is huge. This is like really why this starting hand is so good. However, to do that, I still need to get the 3rd science tag to play AI Central, but what we have here, Olympus Conference, one of the best cards in the game, especially for this strategy. Yeah, we got this. Also worth noting that the preludes, even though they're not that good, they do draw me 4 cards, and I actually need that because I need 1 more science tag and I need all the earth tags I can get. Then I kept Tectonic Stress Power, just because I needed some energy production to play AI Central. That's pretty much what it is. I did actually calculate this out, that I had enough mega credit to both play Tectonic Tech Power and AI Central, thanks to the 60 mega credit I got from Terraformer. If I had fewer mega credits from my corporation, I might have actually just bought a standard project instead of the Tectonic Stress Power. All of this is of course in the service of getting AI Central in the first generation. Then we got Business Network, really nice, Earth Tag, and even more card draw. And finally I got the Mars Converter, which is just the cherry on top. Technically I do need 1 more science tag in order to play this, but with all of this card draw I have no doubt that I'll pick up 1 more science tag. So just a perfect opening hand to go god mode. Like, I'm not kidding, when I saw this hand I immediately knew that I was gonna win the game by having the double amount of points as my enemies. It's really, this matters so much. If you want to, you can watch this entire game with commentary. It's episode 16 part 1. And then we have another game where I went even more god mode than this one and got 278 victory point, and that is episode 16 part 2. The card strategy is the most fun strategy to play, in my opinion. And it's also, like I mentioned, the strategy that can by far create the high scores. Yes, you can also achieve high scores with cities and stuff, but with the card strategy, this is how you can get the really high scores. And this also, of course, like we talked about in the first video, is due to the fact that the card strategy is a stepping stone to every other strategies, except for maybe the filthy dirting terraforming strategy. In real life, the best game I've had is 280 on Generation 11 in a 2-player game with Preludes, Venus, Colonies. So no turmoil, no fan-made content. And how did I do it? You guessed it, I had the greedy card strategy. In that game I also had a pretty early AI Central, and I had Byron, and this combo is really good. So there's like 4 free cards every generation. On top of that, I had a godlike Earth Tag opening hand with a few Earth Tag Mega Credit amplifiers, so this game was just really good. So like we said, if you have both card draw and money income, you go god mode. And speaking of corporations, here are a few examples of corporations which are quite nice when you're going for the card strategy. To be honest, there are too many good corporations to name, these are just some examples, but like you probably guessed, it's all about getting money income from your corporation and card draw if possible. A lot of people don't like Point Luna that much, which I kinda don't understand. At least for the card strategy, this corporation is like perfect. Sometimes it just gives you a ton of cards, and the 1 titanium production is nice for engine plus the earth tag, so if you're lucky you get some mega credit amplifiers with earth tags, and it's awesome, man. But it really also depends on number of players. I rang this build before, but like Point Luna is actually better in 2-player games compared to 5-player games, because in 5-player games the card strategy is not that good. In the next strategy here, we'll actually compare Point Luna to Tharsis, good shit. Let's go. Minor strategy number 4, this city strategy. So this is a strategy that both suits short games and can also suit long games. So this is kind of a special one. I'll show you what I mean. So for long games, for example, if you build all the cities on the map, you kind of need time to fill up the rest of the map with greeneries. Like it could be the case that you place Tharsis, you have Immigrant City, Martian Wells, you're vibing, you're spamming cities like an absolute maniac, covering entire planet with cities. So on the second half of the game, you really want to cover all the spaces between your cities with greeneries, otherwise it's a big waste. So in this case, it could be in your interest to let the game drag out simply because you just need all the time you can get to place all the greeneries in between your cities. The key is to match the number of cities with number of greeneries by the end of the game. If you build too many cities while getting too few greeneries, you will lose the game. So in long games, you can actually play a mix of both the card strategy and the city strategy. This might be better for you. So when is it good to go for the city strategies in short games? You can use cities and greeneries kind of a way to close the oxygen and the game pretty early on. Perhaps it's also in your interest to close the game as soon as possible because you see the opponents are going for the ultra mega gritty late game. If this is the case, you can actually use the city strategy in conjunction with the terraforming strategy. This could be kind of good for you because then you just need someone to have heat production. It could be yourself because naturally you are going to have plant production when you play with cities. Usually it's the oxygen or the temperature that's the last one to end the game, but even if it is the water, it's actually not so bad for you because you can just buy water from the cards or the water standard project, and in the process you'll get a lot more plants, and also you'll get some nice water placement bonuses and also nice placement bonuses for your cities and your greeneries to boot. Also worth noting, in short games the scores are lower, which means that the VP you're getting from your cities and greeneries could be enough for you to win the game. So what I'm really trying to say here is that the city strategy is usually better in 4 or 5 player games because first of all the card strategy won't have enough time to beat you, and also in 4 or 5 player games the opponents are more likely to feed your free mega credit production by building cities all over the map. This is if you have Immigrant City, Tharsis or Martian Rails of course. And also like we mentioned, the city strategy plus the terraforming strategy combo is just greater in shorter games, and usually 4 to 5 player games are shorter in terms of generation. And then if you go to 2 to 3 player games, it's kinda exactly the opposite, which makes sense. So in 2 or 3 player games the card strategy will likely beat you. Your opponents are less likely to feed you mega credit production by building cities on the early game because there are fewer people and they care more about not helping your opponent. And also the city strategy plus terraforming strategy combo is straight up bad in longer games. It really is. The thing is, in 2 player games you will play to hurt your opponent because this one opponent, he's now 100% of your opponents, if that makes sense. This is also why attack cards are generally better in 2 player games, and getting hit by attack cards actually matters a lot if you're going for plant production, which by association also matters a lot if you're going for cities. When it comes to burning plants and stuff, it's actually not so clear in this case because there are some factors to consider here. In 5 player games there are more people who can draw asteroids, and also worth noting, the cards that usually burn plants are mostly TR related cards, and cards that gives you TR are very popular in 5 player games. That being said, the 2 players in a 2 player game have a lot more cards than the 5 players in the 5 player games, and all I'm saying is if you're playing 2 players and he gets an asteroid, then of course it will hit you. But to be clear, I actually think plant production is really good regardless of player number. In 5 player games you care less about hurting or helping an opponent because this opponent is only 25% of your opponents. So what I'm trying to say is in 5 player games you're really only playing to help yourself. It doesn't matter that much if you're hurting 1 out of 5 opponents, it's better to help yourself. That being said, if you have the opportunity of burning 4+ plants from an enemy player in a 5 player game, you still will of course consider it. Depending on the guy you're hurting, maybe it's your rival to win the game or something, and it also depends if the asteroid you're playing is good for you. Maybe there's a bonus or something. And also, and this is probably the most important part, it's just very satisfying to hurt other people in board games. In the second video, in tip number 18, I also talk a bit more about this stuff, but as you probably gathered by now by this insane rambling I just did, it's a bit of a grey area, so many things to consider to be honest. However, that being said, returning to the point, I'm still 100% convinced that the city strategy is better in 4 to 5 player games, and the city strategy is worse in 2 to 3 player games. Here is an example that really nails how much I believe in this statement. I will go so far, and this is maybe crazy to you, but I will go so far as to say this. In 2-player games, I think Tharsis is a B tier corporation and I think Point Luna is an S tier with a goat. However, in 5-player games, I actually think Tharsis is an S tier with a goat and Point Luna is a B tier. You might think, what, are you crazy? Point Luna is better than Tharsis? Boneless, you crazy. But no, I'm actually not kidding. This is, I believe in this. And as you probably gathered by now, this sort of insane statement is tied to the fact that I think the card strategy is better than 2-player games, whereas the city strategy is better in 5-player games. Like in 4 to 5-player games, you can actually just choose Tharsis, and even if you don't get any other good city synergetic cards, you could just have this corporation anyway and just wait for others to build some cities once in a while, and it's not terrible. But of course, in most cases, if you are picking Tharsis, it's because you yourself want to play cities. That's the safer way to go. And if you don't believe Luna can be really good in 2-player games, this is actually the corporation I used to get 278 on the Mars app. And like we mentioned, you can check that game out, episode 16 part 2, if like you want to experience the full potential Fryxelius Dragon Ball final form of how good Point Luna can be if you're going for the card strategy. Final thing I want to add to this is that Tharsis and Point Luna, these are never bad corporations. B tier is pretty good. You could even make an argument for A tier, not important. But I really hope that this example nails home how I actually think about strategies in general. So in my opinion, there are 2 ways to play the city strat. One, you go 50% all in on the city strat, so this is better for 2 or 3-player games. Maybe you didn't get as much city synergy as you had hoped. You kind of want to focus on other things also. You mainly use cards to build your engine. You're playing a lot of cards also. It could happen that you just have really good cards and you want to play them too, and this is totally fine. So you can build cities whenever it's convenient for you, and you can play other cards whenever it's convenient for you. And finally, you do need some planned production. Even if you're only 50% all in, you still need a fair bit amount of planned production. So you're of course still looking for some of these planned amplifiers for planned production in general. Of course, very good when you're going for cities. And then there's the other way of playing the city strat, which is full YOLO all in. So in this case, you have a lot of city synergies. The cards are kind of bad, or maybe you have so good city synergy that you can just focus on building cities instead and build your engine this way. If you have only one effect, like let's say you have Immigrant City for example, and then you still consider building the Build a City Standard project, this is a very desperate play. It's not good. Because then you play 25 mega credit for 2 mega credit production. This is not efficient. Cities are mainly a way to get VP in the late game. They're not so great for building engine, so you do need a lot of support if you really want to go all in and just build your engine with cities. Even if you're all in full YOLO on cities, you still want to play some of the really good cards you get. But the cards you play has to be really good. I think the mistake that people sometimes make is that if they're going all in on cities, then they still keep a little too many cards than they should. I'm actually also guilty of this. It's one of the games I have on my channel. You really have to be very picky of which cards you actually keep if you're like full YOLO all in on cities. And then of course you need a lot of planned production. Like if you're going all in on cities, you need all the planned production you can get. And speaking of the city and the Greenery Standard project, I'm not gonna spend too much time because we talked about this in the last video, but I thought it would still be relevant to just mention this. So when is it good to buy the city or the greenery as standard projects? So let's start with greeneries. 1, you need to close the game. 2, you want the last few available TR when the parameter is about to close. 3, you can get the temperature bonus on the oxygen scale. 4, you're close to playing a good card with oxygen requirement, and it pretty much has to be like one of the good cards. It has to be like birds, insects, zeppelin, something like this. And 5, in the late game you can actually use cities and greeneries to get VP. It's actually quite nice. It's pretty efficient, so you have to do the math. Is it better to use your cards or is it better to just spam cities and greeneries? Because greeneries are mainly 3 victory points, sort of. 1 victory point for greenery, 1 for oxygen, and 1 next to your city. So what about cities versus greeneries? I've gotten this question a few times. When is it better to actually build a city and when is it better to build the greenery, especially in the late game? As a rule, you really want to place your cities next to at least 2 greeneries. Or to be precise, when the game is over, the city actually has to be adjacent to at least 3 greeneries, because if it's only next to 2 greeneries, then it's actually like 2 mega credit more cost effective to build a greenery next to your city instead. But then you could also take into account that the city gave you 1 mega credit production. Just know that a greenery next to your city, that's like 2 VP, but if the oxygen is not closed yet, then this is better, because then it would be 3 VP. So the math is kind of this: if you place a greenery greenery next to one of your own cities, then that is 2 points. So usually this is better than placing a city next to 2 greeneries, but maybe this city can have even more greeneries by the end of the game, so it's really hard to say. And then we have other factors as well. If the map is filling up, you should also get some of the good city placements while you can. So because of this, you can also make the argument that it's a little bit better to place cities first, while they have a lot of good spots for cities, and then later on you build greeneries around your cities. So cities and greeneries are mainly a way to get VP, which is why these are often used in the late game. Because like we alluded to, cities are pretty bad for engine building unless you have a lot of city synergy. And to be clear, you have to have like really good city synergy to warrant building this terrible city standard project in the early game. In my opinion, you really have to have 2 of these 3 cards here. Why are these 3 cards extra good, I think? Well, that's because they give mega credit production whenever a city is placed. If you play 1 energy to get 1 gold every generation per city, that's the same as getting like immigrant city. So let's actually compare these 2 cards. I think people tend to underestimate Martian Rails. I think this card is actually really good. I would argue that Martian Rails is slightly stronger than immigrant city, but it's kind of a close call. Because yes, immigrant city, it gives you a city right off the bat, but then on the other hand, it gives you -2 mega credit production to play, and then you get 1 back, so it's really like 1 mega credit production minus. And both of these cards kind of cost 1 energy production when you think about it, and both of these cards kind of gives you 1 mega credit production every time the city is placed. So they're really similar, but there are small differences though. The advantages of Martian Rails is that it gives you mega credit in the same generation as you play it. So that's like slightly better than just getting passive mega credit production. On the flip side, then you're vulnerable to cards that steal your energy production, but there are only 2 of those, and that doesn't happen that often. The small advantage of immigrant city, however, is that it also works on off-world cities. Martian Rails and Zeppelins, they do not work on off-world cities. And the mega credit production aspect of Tharsis, that does not work on off-world cities either. Let's talk about immigrant city, because this card is actually pretty wild. It can sometimes just straight up win you the game, and sometimes it actually loses you the game without you even knowing about it. So the trick is to actually understand when exactly to use this card. The thing is, it actually takes a while for Immigrant City to kick in, and you can't know if your opponent will help you build cities after you play Immigrant City. And in a game that's all about the snowball effect, you have to be really careful when you're spending this much, like 13 mega credits, 3 for the cards, and an energy production for something that essentially gives you minus mega credit production. However, down the road, Immigrant City can give you so much. So I have no doubt that it's a good card, but you really have to be careful here. So when exactly should you play this card? First of all, you need to play it at the start of the generation. If this is the generation you decide to play Immigrant City, play it as soon as possible, because usually people tend to start the generation building cities, so getting Immigrant City down as soon as possible is pretty key. And also, if you plan on playing Immigrant City, you kind of need to have a plan to build more cities yourself. You can't just rely on other people building cities and pumping this up for you. Or can you? Maybe you could, because maybe you have a read that someone else is about to build a city. Maybe they are playing Tharsis, or maybe you play Draft and you pass along some good city cards like Research Outpost or something. Or maybe you just predict that people are about to compete for the Mayor milestone. So if you have a read like this, then it would be entirely reasonable to just slam down Immigrant City. So like I said, if you play against Tharsis and you just play Immigrant City, well, now you're also Tharsis. With one card, you just completely cancelled out the bonus of his cooperation. That's a little bit funny when that happens. And finally, you can also just play Immigrant City and just like hope you get lucky, but I mean, this is really risky. I'm not so sure this is a good idea. Then we got other city synergetic cards like these. These are cards that are definitely cards you're looking for when you're playing cities, but for the purposes of engine building, these by themselves are not really enough. And if you really want to play this trash standard project in the early game, then you kinda need to have 2 of the big 3, like Immigrant City, Martian Rail, Tharsis. Then you might be thinking, why is Zeppelin not up there? That also gives a mega credit production based on cities, but the thing is, the 5 oxygen requirement on Zeppelins just makes this card so unreliable. Sometimes it takes a long time for the oxygen to even go there, and by that time then the mega credit production you get is not really that much of a big deal, because maybe we're already in the mid to late game. Where Zeppelins truly shine is when you just top deck it in the early to mid game, where the oxygen is close to 5, and then you can maybe even just build a greenery just to get this down, and it feels really good. However, the biggest issue with this card, in my opinion, is that you cannot keep it in your opening hand because it's just too unreliable. So you kind of just have to hope that you top deck this card at the right time, and if you do that, it can be very strong. It's very awkward to keep this in your opening hand because you just never know how much time it will take before the 5 oxygen requirement has been met. But what if you don't have Immigrant City, Martian Rails, or Tharsis, or maybe you just have one of these cards? What is your plan then? Let's say, for instance, you picked up a card like Pets. So pets doesn't really give you any mega credit production or mega credits or anything. It's only a card to get VP. And normally I ring the spell that VP should be played in the second half of the game or the end of the game or something like this. But this is kind of different, right? Because this card gives a lot of VP during the game. It actually gives more VP the earlier you put it down. So this is one of these luxury cards, as I see it, that you can play in the early game if your economy can handle it. And if your economy is still struggling, you kind of want to get your engine building cards down first. In that case, you can still play it in the mid game and it's still gonna be fine. I think the mistake that some players make is, oh, I gotta get pets down as soon as possible in the first generation. And it's not that important to get it down that early. What I'm saying is that it might actually ruin your chances of building an efficient engine if you just play cards like these in the first generation. It's okay to wait until the mid game before you play a card like pets. And you might be thinking, oh, but I'm missing out on free VP. Nah, but what you're getting in return is like 10 mega credits you could have spent on engine. So it's like a trade-off. You have to make the assessment. Is it more important for me to make a good engine here and now, or is it more important to just slam down pets? However, needless to say, is anyone around the table is going for cities, you are going to play pets. Pets is a stupidly strong card. Or you could just play it because you're sitting with like Miranda Resort and you need the Earth tag or something. Immigration Shuttles is also a card that I should mention here. At the end of the game, it gives you like 1 VP per 3 cities placed. So if you get like 12 or 15 cities, then it's kind of good because then it'll give 3 or 4 victory points at the end of the game. It also depends when you can play it. It's one of these cards, well, if I don't really have anything to build my engine with, I might as well take this one, but it's not efficient because 31 for 5 mega credit production, it's a very slow way to build your engine. But if you have nothing better and you are going for cities, then why not? This card feels to me a little bit like a sort of a Jovian amplifier if you're going for cities. But by the end of the game, there really should be like 12 or 15 cities on the map for this card to be worth it, I think. And it doesn't have to be only your cities, it can also be everyone else's cities. Rover Construction is another card that's just so cheap and so good that you just play. If anyone is going for cities, you just play Rover Construction. It's really cheap, it comes with the VP, and you don't have to place a lot of cities for this card to just pay for itself, so I think this card is really good. Also, a thing to keep in mind is everyone, including myself, we have to get mega credit production and stuff like this. But getting 2 mega credits every time a city is placed, it's pretty good as well. Like, if you think about it, if there are only 2 generations left in the game, then this card, Rover Construction, it's like better than actually getting 1 mega credit production. So it's also a little bit about when you play it, but this card is so cheap. It's like Pets is one of these luxury cards. I'll just play it whenever I have the opportunity. And naturally, if you are planning to build cities yourself, of course, it would be nice if you could play Rover Construction before start building your cities. Standard projects, kind of the same thing. If you're going for the Build a City standard project, this is really good, especially for the late game when you're building a lot of these. I feel like I've talked plenty about standard technology. It's a good card. Greenhouses is a deceptively strong card. If you think about it, if you only have like 8 cities on the map, then you can get a greenery down for 6 mega credit. If I'm Tharsis, I might even keep this in my opening hand just so I can play it in the late game. This card is like really strong in the last generation. Or you can also use this card to get the temperature bonus on the oxygen scale, make a play like this, it's also fine. But mostly I think I would play this in the last generation. It's a perfect card if you're all in on cities and then you slam this in the last generation, you'll get like 2 or 3 greeneries that you could just put in between your cities. Now, a few things to keep in mind when you're playing the city strategy. Sooner or later, all players should build at least 1 city. It doesn't matter if you're going for the city strat or not. No matter what strat you're going for, really, you should have 1 city placed on the map at some point in the game. And the reason this is useful information is that if you're like claiming all the good city spots on the map, let's say you have Tharsis and Immigrant City and stuff like this, like if you're really lucky and you just can get away with like building a lot of cities and building your engine this way, in that case, you're kind of forcing people to sooner or later get one of the good last available city spots. And people might even start to panic a little bit because they can see, oh shit, I have to get at least one of the good available spots left. And this could be kind of nice because then they're feeding you free mega credit production, and additionally maybe they feel forced to place down a city sooner than they would have liked. Instead of going for their own plan, they kind of feel, oh shit, I have to get 1 city that's like 5 greeneries around it or something. So you're a little bit disrupting their plans maybe. But that being said, it's also a little bit of a double-edged sword, because when you're playing this golden city strats and you have cities all over, you kind of don't want an enemy city in the middle of your empire. So placing your cities strategically to avoid people just griefing you with a city in the middle of your empire, that's also something you have to think about. Now, you need to know when to stop spamming cities. Like I mentioned, this is like literally the hardest thing about playing the city strategy, is knowing when to stop. If you're building too few cities, then your engine might not be good enough and you're not getting all the good city spots. But then again, if you're building too many cities, then you won't have time enough to build greeneries around your cities. There's also this aspect of it being a little bit of an illusion. You always think you made the wrong choice, but maybe you really didn't. Maybe it's just because your opponents are reacting to the fact that they're like, alright, he's making more cities, now we have to close the game. So the game could just be over sooner than you predicted. And it's also the thing, like, if you're building cities, having a good time, you're building a bunch of cities, getting mega credit production, this is fun, man. This is really fun. It's like you have to force yourself, stop having fun, because you need to force yourself to be a responsible adult, not placing cities all over the map. Sometimes you just need to stop a little earlier, even though it's a lot of fun. You just have to stop a little earlier and start building greeneries around your cities. Otherwise you're gonna lose. That's all I'm saying. But maybe it's not about winning. Maybe it's about having fun putting cities everywhere. As I'm sure you know by now, VP comes from greeneries around your cities. The cities themselves does not give any VP, so you have to make greeneries around your city to actually score some VP at the end of the game. If you get no greeneries, you get no VP from your cities. Because the city strategy really goes hand in hand with plant production. I think most people know this, but I don't think people realize that if you get like a lot of plant production, let's say you get kelp farming with ecology research prelude, or you get some sort of insane plant production going, then you really should do the city strat to some extent. You really should place a lot of cities so you can take all the greeneries down, and that's probably gonna be enough for you to win the game. So the city strat can be if you're Tharsis or something, but the city strat can also come if you're Ecoline or you get like a lot of plant production somewhere. These two things are linked together. Plant production, city strat. These two are like two halves of the same coin, if that makes sense. Now let's look at another insane starting hand I had. Once again, if you want to watch the full game, it's episode 18 part 1. This hand just screams going for cities. I mean, going all in on cities. This hand is really good. Let's talk about why. Then we got exactly the combo I said before. I think I got the name wrong, but what I'm talking about is ecology experts and kelp farming. This combo is insane. So look what you're getting with this combo. You're getting 2 mega credit production, 2 plants, and 4 plant production, and a victory point. And 2 plant tags, which can also be really good because I have insects here. So the other prelude here is pretty bad. I mean, the funny thing is that even with this golden starting hand, I'm going for cities, I'm going for plant production, even then this early settlement still feels like a bad prelude card. I don't know, man. This card is really bad. But if there was ever a game where I really should try to make this early settlement prelude work, it should be now, right? The funny thing is, even with this golden city starting hand, I might actually have made a mistake not taking donation over early settlement. The argument for donation here is that I'm starting with IO Mining Industries. So there's an argument to be made that you play donation and then you like in the second generation, maybe you can play IO Mining Industries in this case. And speaking of IO Mining Industries, I'm not sure I should have kept this card. I mean, it's so tempting, right? Get IO Mining Industries in your opening hand. Oh man, feels good. And if you're gonna watch the game, like in hindsight, I know that this was a bad call because I ended up having only one Jovian, and that was IO Mining Industries, and in that case it's just simply not worth it. Also keep in mind that this is a 4-player game, so the game's gonna be over pretty soon, so all things considered, I don't think I should have kept IO Mining Industries, even though it hurts my heart, but I really don't think I should have kept this card. I needed to just have enough discipline to just say, alright, I'm going all in on cities, that's all I'm gonna do. It's gonna be plenty enough to win the game, no problem. I don't need IO Industries. It's kinda not the strat I'm going for. That's what I should have done, but it's really hard to just not keep IO Mining Industries in your opening hand. I'm sure you guys can relate. Then we got Bribed Committee. One of these, well, I think this card is okay. It gives like 2 mega credit production for 10 mega credits, so it's kinda on the weak side. But I think the play here would have been to keep Bribed Committee and then throw away IO Mining Industries. I think that's what I should have done. That would have been better. And then we also got Development Center. I could have kept this if I kept the power generation. It would have been alright, but then I'm not getting the plant production in the city. And you know, my strategy is kinda all in on cities. So I really have to be picky. Which cards do I keep and when do I just go all in on cities? Then we got Worms. For once I actually kept this card, but that's because I have 3 microbe tags already. And it's also worth noting that Worms and insects, they have a high oxygen requirement, but I have so much plant production in this hand that it's gonna be no problem for me to raise the oxygen so I can actually play these cards. Then we got Robotic Workforce, also a card I maybe shouldn't have kept. It's a little bit greedy, but I think my idea was that I could use this on early settlement, so at the very least I can get 1 plant production with this card. So in that case it's like Adaptive Legion, but without the plant tag, so that actually sounds really bad when I say it out loud. So even though I get a really good starting hand like this, there's still a lot of things you have to consider. But that being said, when I see this starting hand, I've no doubt that I'm gonna win the game. And once again, especially considering that this is a 4-player game, the card strategy is not gonna beat me because the game's gonna probably be short. So I'm feeling very confident. This is a very good starting hand for going for cities. A little bonus with the city strat is that a lot of milestone and awards actually fits with the city strategy. So if we got the vanilla map here, then we have Mayor, Gardener, and Landlord. So these are 2 milestones and 1 auto ward that caters to the landlord. This is why the city strategy is a little bit stronger on the vanilla map here. 3 cities, easy. 3 gardener, easy. Landlord, obviously. But on the other maps, there usually are like 2 things that caters to the city strategies. So here on the Hellas map, we got the Polar Explorer. I mean, you can start the game by making a few cities down there if you want. You can also play it further north to get some of the good plants. But it's just something to keep in mind. Also, the Cultivator, like I said, the city strategy goes hand in hand with plants, so it makes a lot of sense to also go for the Cultivator. And on Elysium, kind of the same story. We got Desert Settler and we got Estate Dealer. It's a little bit awkward that the Desert Settler wants you to play cities in the south and the Estate Dealer wants you to play cities in the north, but you know, if you're going all in the cities, you probably have cities everywhere, so it's kind of good. Also, a little bonus if you're playing Tharsis on this map is that there is this Olympus Moons, which has 3 cards. So no matter what I do, if I play Tharsis, I would always put a city there, I think. And then you might be thinking, but then you're only getting like maybe 2 plants around that city. And yeah, that's kind of true, but I think I would still take the 3 cards, to be honest. It's just too good to pass up. There's also a spot with 3 plants, also worth noting. That's also really good. How to counter the city strategy. So what do you do if the opponent is playing the city strategy? There's a few things you can do. It's actually not that hard to counter. You can play city synergetic cards yourself. If you're playing against Tharsis or something, just play pets, just play Immigrant City. The thing about city synergetic cards is that they work when opponents are building cities. So even though you're not planning to build so many cities yourself, if you're playing against Tharsis, just slam down pets or something, and then he will just keep giving you a lot of stuff during the game. You don't even have to do anything. So if you play like Immigrant City, you're completely cancelling out the effect of his cooperation, because now if he wants to build city, then he's gonna give gold to himself and you. Also, you can just place a bunch of annoying tile in the middle of his empire. So this way to counter the city strat is also pretty straightforward. Just consider keeping cards that has a placement bonus and just use it to disrupt his little pattern and just put it in the middle of his empire. He's gonna be so salty about it. And you can even do this in the late game. So in the late game, if you pick up like for free maybe a card like Mining Area or Industrial Center, then these cards, they're pretty bad at this point, but you can still use them to just be a little terrorist. So you're kind of playing these cards as if they were attack cards. They don't really do anything for you, not in the late game, but you can just play them because they're cheap and they're gonna like deny him a couple of points. It's really annoying. Number 3, just build a total of 1 to 2 cities. And I'm talking about just during the game at some point. You don't have to do it at the start of the game. In that case, you're just gonna give him mega credit production. The thing is, you always want to have at least 1 city on the map. And the reason you put it in the middle of his empire is first of all to disrupt his plan. It's gonna be really annoying for him. You're gonna deny him a lot of points. And if you manage to put it like smack in the middle of his empire, then he's probably gonna have to like at least place some greeneries around your city, because it's also helping himself, right? So you're gonna get a little bit of extra value for free this way. And finally, you can just forget about him and just focus on your own game. The thing is, I think people are maybe hyping up Tharsis a little bit too much. Like, it's not that strong. I mean, you can just focus on your own game and maybe you'll beat him just by playing cards or playing your own strategy. You really don't have to play his game, if that makes sense. This chapter ended up being a little bit long, so I thought I would just here at the end, I would just give a little bit of summation of what we have learned in this chapter. So 1, you got a lot of city synergetic cards. Obviously, then you are inclined to go for cities. Immigrant City, Martian Rails, Tharsis, these are probably the strongest one, but there's a lot of good cards with city synergy. So if you get some of these cards or some of the other cards I'm not mentioning here, sure, go for it. And 2, if you got a lot of plant production, you should really consider going for cities. So these are some of the plant amplifiers. If you get some of this stuff, cities is definitely on the menu. You are in a 4 or 5 player game. Like we talked about, I'm pretty confident that the city strategy in general is stronger in 4 or 5 player games. And you can also play it in 2-3 player games, but then it should be like half city strat and half card strategy, especially in the 2 player game. You just have to go for the card strategy, and then if you also on top of that get some city synergetic cards, perfect, you can do both. That being said, if your entire hand just screams cities, it's still fine, right? Just know that it comes with a lot more risk in 2 or 3 player games. And finally, you play on the stand-up map with Mayor, Garden and Landlord, then the city strat is a little bit extra good. And that's pretty much it for this episode. It went a little bit longer than I thought, so I'm gonna cut this in 2. So in the second half, we're gonna talk about Jovian tax and green tax. So thank you so much for watching. As always, if you have anything you want to debate with me, any strategy I might have been missing here or something, feel free to mention in the comments. Thanks for watching.